I'm starting to feel like reality is fading into almost like the secondary part of my life. And not just my life, but seemingly like everyone I know. And what I mean by that is it just seems like we spend so much time on the screen, and more importantly, the stuff on, my laptop screen, my phone screen, like dictates my life. It's like it determines how much money I make, which leads to, dictating my physical surroundings and the quality of life you're able to access. And I feel like a lot of the pursuit of money is, for that exact thing I just said, material access, the ability to buy things and, not have to work and not have to stress, not have to feel the angst or worry about, being unsure how you're going to pay for something next week or next month or next year, or being fearful of some sort of emergency. But I think that, it's a little imbalanced that we spend so much time, attention, and focus on money, and the point of that money is to give us a better life, But what are the ways that the pursuit of money is getting in the way of a better life? So it's about 7 a.m. I am in the middle of the woods. And this is free, and it's so funny, like, you would think that on a snowy day like today, the thing to do would probably just be to film this from indoors, but I actually love hiking in the winter, and it feels so funny to me that, like, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of people are missing out on a lot of beauty by trying to stay warm, trying to stay comfortable. So yeah, back to the money thing, it's like, if you have all the money in the world, you, like, we've heard so many successful people say money doesn't buy happiness. We see successful people seemingly be deprived, and oftentimes it seems like they have a way worse, social life and familial, like family and everything like that, than just a regular person, and that's where I feel like so much of the driving factor behind this idea of, like, success or whatever is not actually, like, dealing with what's right in front of you, like, how am I going to survive, how am I going to eat. I feel like it's way more so about looking around us and then trying to, I don't know, there's like this saying, keeping up with the Joneses, like trying to maintain some sort of projection of insecurity. So what I mean by that, a projection of insecurity, is when we see, or a lot of people, when they see other people, they tend to really notice and put a big emphasis on subconsciously the ways that they might be better than them, the ways that they might be, getting more money, getting more girls, getting more, favor in whatever way. And it's a normal thing to do. We, look at our social circles and the people around us to calibrate ourselves and to figure out if, we are doing the right things and we're inhabiting the right way of being. But I think that there's such a performative element to the people that we are today, and I think so much of that is the result of, like, operating within these systems that nobody really understands. Like, that idea of, like, everyone thinks that adults are like really aware and responsible and mature, and then the older you get, you realize like, oh, these are just bigger kids with more words. Like, they don't actually understand things better than kids. I'd argue a lot of times they understand things worse than kids. It becomes way too abstracted and way too conceptualized. So yeah, I think that basically, walking in the snow. So I feel like one of the kind of issues right now, to tie that all together, is like I was saying, how we're spending so much time on a screen. We're in a situation where we're at the very beginning of, actually it's not the beginning, we're deep into the idea of letting external forces and external influences into our community. And we're actually so deep into that system that, first it entered the home with newspapers and eventually television. And then we started building homes in a way where there's a set space just to watch TV, just to sit there and listen to things outside of your direct community, outside of your direct existence. And, arguably, it didn't really bring any benefit to the individual. It was more so the result of a huge marketing effort, a huge marketing push, because once they get that TV in, then they can basically use it to sell you a bunch of stuff, a bunch of different products, a bunch of different services, and a bunch of different subscriptions. It is a programming device, and the programming on the television is, pretty much fully uncorrelated to our like physical reality, our physical existence, and our overall human experience. So we went from having kind of that one TV in the house now where the entire family is kind of getting the same programming, to the personal computer and eventually the iPhone and smartphones, where people all have their own individual programming that's super tailored to them. And all of the stuff they're getting on this programming actually has nothing to do with their life. And I'm not saying that to like negate it or degrade it. I'm not like a internet hater. Like I said earlier, it seems like the most of my life at this point and the most of my future is going to be spent in focus of a screen, rather than dealing with all this. Like, it's going to be dealing with this to change this. I have to go through here in order to deal with this. And I think as a result of that, we're now in like a era of history that's going to be looked back on as the universal identity crisis. I think there's a mass kind of update of the global consciousness of, people all around the world, because we just opened, the floodgates, just fucking infinite, exponential curve has been achieved, where we're just at that up point where it used to be like actually difficult to access information. People like had to go to college or else they would hardly know how to read and definitely not know, any sort of like finer skills. From that point to now, we have all of the human history, all of the logic and understanding that's ever been documented pretty much accessible within moments, within seconds, even when you're in the middle of the woods. It makes it so that, I know for sure, like I'm willing to bet everything that that's going to lead to like massive changes. And that's where I feel like so much of the negative stuff that's going on right now, so much of the ways that the internet exploits us and manipulates information is kind of like the dark before the dawn, because that ability, the access we have for the liberation of information, is such a significant element of the internet. And I don't care about these short-term bumps and bruises of, being exploited, because we just need to have a more aware, informed, and accountable consumer in order to fix these things. People die, people are born, things change. That's pretty much the only thing that stays the same. And one place, I really want to focus on, I feel like sometimes when I'm filming stuff, it's just 1,000 ways to say the same thing. One thing I really want to focus on is the emphasis of, us, we the people, us young people who do not have some sort of agenda that is subversive or divisive or manipulative, to really start interacting with each other and eventually looking to each other to replace these antiquated systems, these institutions that no longer serve us, they're no longer meaningful or helpful. Like, it's so funny when I talk to my friends about like record labels, like music labels. There was a point in time where the record label's job was to put you in a studio that's able to record music and then physically put that music onto a vinyl or a CD, get a photographer with a camera, because you had to buy cameras to take pictures and do marketing. And then in order for people to find out about it, you'd have to put them in magazines and film music videos, put those on television, put them in the newspaper, magazines, and TV. Those kind of different ways that our communities and our individual life was infiltrated by external corporate forces. They would basically offer that to these different artists. And I could go into a lot. I feel like there's two routes I could go right now. One is like the ways in which that gives them so much power and leverage over what is even getting in front of us, and on the other hand, the thing that's more interesting is the way that I can just upload something to Apple Music right now. So like my music is in the same record store as Drake and Adele and Frank Sinatra and Radiohead. Like, it's the primary way we deal with pretty much everything now is through this screen right here, through a kind of pixel representation of it. And I feel like that record label example is a great example of like, wait a second, if you really just stop and think, like, this thing started 100 years ago or whatever, when there was an actual need for it. There's no longer an actual need for it. So just like how record labels are eventually going to have to become outdated, because I know it's really hard to see that in the short term, but in the long term, these companies are only as influential as they are competitive, and they're no longer competitive, so now it's not a matter of like, best man wins. It's like they're doing everything and anything they can to kind of like squeeze out the last 20, 50, 60 years of juice out of all this IP that they've invested in. It's like the reason that like we can't play Lauryn Hill, the reason that we can't play like, the Carpenters or Melanie or, Frank Sinatra or Elvis or all these people who were just musicians who just wanted to jam out and have a good time, is because like some random kid who has no correlation to the artist at all, is getting royalties because his grandfather or his great-grandfather, purchased the masters to the record. And it's like, I'm just gonna buy back all that shit. Like, I don't know how we're gonna do it, but the liberation of information is something we find ourselves right in the middle of. And like I said before, it's like the night is darkest before the dawn. Like, it seems like so exploitative and so negative and so predatory, but that's just like the pretext, the preface, the rising action to the eventual conclusion that we as individuals and we as consumers need to be very aware that it's not all like sunshine and rainbows. Like, there are people out here trying to get you. There are people out here trying to trick you. There are people out here trying to take advantage of, us. So, I feel like the same thing I was just talking about with record labels. How there used to be record stores and you have to like ship different CDs across the country and, deal with the television promo and all this different stuff. And now it's like none of that really matters. It's like they ask the artists to market themselves because those newspapers and those magazines, no one cares about them at all. I feel like it's the same thing with schools, with university, with college. It's like the primary benefit of college was the ability to the archive, the library of information, as well as resources to further understand this information, and then professors, teachers who were able to understand and communicate this information. So this is where I was like, they're only as influential as they are competitive. So now, if you are a really top tier professor or educator, someone with a really high level of understanding, if you post that on YouTube, if you post that on the internet, you will make exponentially more than if you were just a regular teacher, And not only will you make exponentially more money, you will impact and affect and be able to communicate with exponentially more people for exponentially less cost. In order to have that, educator-student relationship, you'd have to like build giant, apartment buildings, dormitories to ship in all these kids and put them all in the same place, and then set up a schedule, and then you have to have an auditorium and you have to have a bunch of them because a bunch of things are going on. So then, you have so much overhead, so much cost just to allow that information to be transferred. So why the heck would someone who really, is top tier understanding, really wants to further the global understanding, why would they go teach, 100, 200 kids without at least recording it? And it's like, if they are recording it, then it's like, maybe we don't need as many of those jobs. Maybe we don't need as many of those professors. And what that frees up and opens up is, that role of providing resources and providing opportunities to further understand, that really becomes emphasized. And stuff like the tuition fees and the, you know, the like grade-based system, the like merit-based system that you have to get in on, like all of the exclusive elements of it, you know, are on track to disappear. And one thing that's interesting is I feel like we as regular people, we the people, tend to give way too much power to evil in our heads. It's like way too easy to be like, oh, it's always going to be like this. It's always going to be, we're always going to be oppressed. We're always going to be this, that, and the third. And it's like, I don't know, dude. I feel like it's going the other way around if you look at a long-term timeline. So it's like we're on a, you know, rough and bumpy part of the road. But I do think that the path is pretty clear ahead of us. I've been working on a bunch of different videos, and I get so caught up and so torn and so in my head about editing, because it's like so much of what I want to do is, you know, requires editing, it requires cool visuals, it requires all that, but then I'm so much at odds with the YouTube algorithm. You know, it's like I feel like I start to get really caught up on this idea that, you know, an algorithm is shaping my understanding of how to make art or how to make something. Because, like, on one hand, if you're not making something that is like optimized for an algorithm on these platforms, then they aren't gonna share it, you know. And it's not even like some sort of agenda or anything. It's just like business practice, you know. Their job is to provide content to people, and the best way for them to do that, the easiest way for them to do that, is a complex mathematical system. But something like art, you know, is outside of math. And I might need to make a whole different vlog on art and my opinions on art and what I mean when I say art. Because for me, there's like arts and there's craft. And I think there's a lot of craft that gets mistaken for art. But art in its essence is at the forefront of human consciousness, and it's about expressing and inquiring into ideas that you could not achieve linguistically at the time. But yeah, it's like, on one hand, I kind of just want to let it rip like this. On the other hand, I want to like have super crazy edited animations and 3D effects and all that. One thing I really gotta get to it is the red versus blue videos. I feel like that's something where I put a lot of weight on my shoulders. I just need to let it rip, because it feels like something is going on where people have really become detached from we're dehumanizing anyone that disagrees with us, you know. And I think a big part of that is because we don't physically interact with each other as much as we used to. So many of the like if you're a liberal, the way you understand conservatives is inflammatory videos on, you know, social media. And if you're a conservative, the way you understand liberals is inflammatory videos on social media and the news on both sides. I mean, the news really set that kind of precedent. But for me, it's like an obvious divide and conquer situation. I firmly believe that the left and the right, the progressives, the conservatives, the liberals, the, you know, right wing, it's a masquerade. You know, it's like something for us to go fight over, while, you know, it's literally like if you leave a bunch of breadcrumbs into a cage and close the cage, it's like that's what we do with these political ideas. It's like they get so sucked up in this super emotional, super like defensive and insecure on both sides, like framework that we completely dehumanize each other in the process. And I feel like that act, otherizing, your neighbor, otherizing thy neighbor, not loving thy neighbor, like looking at someone who is of the same flesh and blood as you and being like, oh, they are evil, they are possessed by Satan because they have a different conclusion than I do on governmental policies, something that is constantly disagreed upon throughout all of human history amongst all governments ever to exist, ever. And it's also an advantageous point of the system. We're supposed to work together to understand and see through these disagreements. And I think even the political climate wears off into just general understandings of each other and the, grand social order. But these red versus blue videos, I want to take something like, immigration, and explain how on one hand, there's no such thing as a country if it doesn't have borders. That's fundamentally the definition of it. On the other hand, you can't have a bunch of people with a $50,000 bonus and zero training, significantly less training than a standard police officer, out here with a license to kill. It's so backwards to me because it's how can both sides not see that? If you're the left in this situation and you say, oh, America needs to bring in more immigrants, it's what is America? What are you talking about when you say America? How are you defining America? Oh, the borders? And then it's on the right, it's the entire point of why y'all have we for both. I'm right in the middle. I fucking love everyone. But the reason we have guns in America and the reason we're so quick to defend ourselves and, take up for 1776 and the Boston Tea Party and, don't tread on me, is about fighting a tyrannical government. And now we have nationwide troops in the street who aren't trained and have the right to ask anybody to identify themselves and basically from there act fully as if they're a police officer, although they are not. These are federal agents. If you're a conservative, you're supposed to be against the federal government. And it's I'm not trying to beat a conservative here. On the same, back to the left, it's the whole reason that these people want to come to America is because it provides great opportunity for a great standard of living. You're able to go get a job and, make money and provide for your family. But the way an economy works and the way a country works is if you let in way too many people, then the quality of living will go down and those jobs will become filled up and filled up and filled up. And it's actually going to price people out of the market who are not willing to work for less. So if you have 50 jobs and 50 people, it's a pretty straightforward equation. If you have 50 jobs and 500 people, that's actually a really bad situation because the 50 people who are going to get the jobs oftentimes are the people who are willing to do it for the least. So on a long enough scale, on a big enough timeline, that doesn't help the immigrants either because it slowly degrades the baseline of the, higher standard of living that they're seeking out. And, it also kind of overlooks the paperwork and the above the board process to be a legal immigrant because, there are people all over the world who, we set a rule. We said, hey, these are the rules. There's people all over the world who follow those rules and have to stay in some country where, they're getting abused or they can't pay their bills or, they're not able to get a job or something like that. And they just have to wait patiently. Meanwhile, the left, we are arguing, just let them all come in, and we'll figure it out. And it's it's not fair. It's just literally not fair to specifically those people. But back to the right. thing that I think is really crucial here is that Obama deported more people than this and didn't have federal agents in the street. So it's like, for years, that was such a big talking point. All these guys who go out in the street with the microphone, did you know Obama deported more people than Trump? Well, god damn, he must have been good at it, because it didn't look like this. It didn't look like people getting shot in the street. And you could argue that there's, protests and there's all this blah, 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 but it's like, nah. There's people in the street with guns. I see them. It's like, historically, that doesn't lead to good kind of social standing between the government and the citizens. Typically, if you have people walking around with big guns, it's usually going to have people on edge. And, you could argue, the conservatives will argue like, it's such a crazy situation because Joe Biden let all these people in and Trump's got to get rid of them. And it's like, my whole point here isn't either of these sides. That's the thing. Like, no one is going to win this debate between me, myself, and I. My point of it is that both sides have good points, and the foundation of America is that idea. The idea that both sides have good points. So I feel like the thing I really want to actualize and reinforce into the social order and communal understanding, our consensus of reality, is the idea that the only person who's wrong is the one who is otherizing and ostracizing and not empathizing with their fellow American or their fellow human being. Because the idea that anyone who disagrees with you from either side, like that they're deranged or demented or, they want to destroy everything you love and care about, that is the evil. The idea that other people, are your enemy. You got to look back at history and realize the vast majority of human beings are oppressed by very high and powerful governments, societies, and oligarchs, rich people with a bunch of money, a bunch of access to resources, density. That's like the real thing to be up against. And the way to be up against it is to reestablish community, reestablish like talking to each other. Because if we trust or rely on, CNN, Fox News, Twitter, X, whatever, to give us our political opinions, we are going to hate each other. And like, no one's above it. I'm not above it. If every time one of these George Floyd, Charlie Kirk situations happens, we have X and Instagram and Facebook as, the medium of engagement, then we're going to keep on hating each other, because the incentive of a lot of these things is just clicks, and that's where we got to be aware of the internet. It's like, if you're in like a physical library, you're going to be really careful with what book you pick up. If I was recording this video on physical film, I'd be a lot more careful and precise with the way I'm filming. But now that we're in this like fully screen pixel world, things seem really like, light to deal with. Like, you can just click on a video, watch it for 2 seconds. You don't like it, click on the next one, click on the next one, click on the next one. So from there, it's like they use psychological tricks. Like, I, as an editor, am going to use psychological tricks in my edited videos to make someone stay and keep watching. So the problem with the political discourse in this country is it is completely and utterly, drowning in those psychological tricks to keep someone engaged. And, I think there's larger conspiracies and stuff there, but I'm trying to stick to the, pure truth as I understand it. Like, it's cold. I'm glad I'm out here. So I quit my job to do YouTube full time. And since then I spent months and months editing, and then my computer crashed and I lost all that stuff. And it happened right when I ran out of money too. So I am significantly drained on my resources, but we will overcome. I appreciate anyone and everyone who's watching this. I really am looking forward to having an online digital community. I really am here to make friends, leave comments, message me however you can, come in contact with me, especially where I'm at right now. Any support, any help is very appreciated. Any feedback, not really on this is like a throwaway. I'm working on like an actual serious kind of output this year of, I guess you could call it short films, something like that. I'm trying to take the way like Ye samples a beat, like how he chops it up, and do that with like textbooks. So stay tuned for that, and let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about. If you leave any questions in the comments or topics, I will respond to them. I can make a video on them. Take advantage of being able to have a large impact on this channel if you're coming across it now. Like any feedback I get, I take very seriously. I went around and asked like first few people what they wanted to see from this channel, like Brother and Edwin and Madani and Kenta and Ona, and like I took those things to heart. That's like those are like the core tenets of the channel right now. Like this year is my college dropout. It's my debut. I don't know, bro. I feel so caught up between feeling old and feeling young. But yeah, stay tuned. Appreciate every one of y'all. Bro, it's so hard, bro. It's so hard. Like, I was ready to just go and stream every day, and I just like got overwhelmed with this like, literally crippling depression. And it's like I don't feel depressed, I don't think depressed, and I'm really skeptical about like my diet, because like it feels like all the food I eat is like designed to kill me. And like, I'll think of all these different reasons why I'm not able to perform at my best. I'll be like, oh, the phone is frying my brain, the food is destroying my body, the air quality is destroying my lungs, the lack of sunlight and ability to be outdoors is destroyed my circadian rhythm. And like sometimes I just have to sit down and realize that it comes in waves, and you can't ride a wave that isn't there. But also it seems like the biggest thing holding me back was actually all of those thoughts about, oh, the food's destroying my body. But I'm a human being, bro. Food, an Oreo cookie is going to take me out? No, bro. We'll survive off of Twinkies for 20 years if we have to. I will turn Twinkies into skin cells and red blood cells and white blood cells and bone tissue, and we can overcome anything. And I have to like remind myself that and hope I believe it, you know, but I think I do. I know I do. I just need to achieve it. Godspeed.